You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm excited to have back the one, the only, the recently recovered Christy Morris.
Heyo, I am back. Sorry that I had to take a little hiatus, but wasn't feeling well, and now I'm doing much better, and thrilled to be back and talk about more awesome content with you, of course.
Yeah, I mean, you were down and out, kind of like Rambo on the bed springs there. It was bad, but you recovered quite well.
Thankfully, no electrocution was involved, so.
That is excellent. That is excellent. Well, we are continuing the Rambo series here with First Blood 2. Is it called Rambo First Blood 2? I can't figure that out because I see it all different ways. Anyway, but back with us to continue the series is the one, the only Mr. Snyder Cuts himself, John Mills.
Yes, it is officially Rambo First Blood Part 2. That is the title card that comes up when you watch the film, and that is how it was billed when it came out. So unless you're also going to jump on the bandwagon of calling it Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, it is not Rambo. It is Rambo First Blood Part 2.
No, so, I'm not going to ever call Raiders of the Lost Ark that, because that's not what the name of the movie is. I'm sorry.
There you go.
So anyway.
There you go.
All kidding aside, we're so excited to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us. As we're recording this, we're having a banner month here on the 602 Club. So just wanted to say a huge thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate you guys. Honestly, you're the reason we do this show. We have so much fun creating this content for you. So thank you so much for listening. You can find us, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can give us a star rating review. We'll read that on the show to thank you for your support there, because it really does help the show grow. You can also find us on Twitter at the 602 Club, and we're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. So please follow us both of those places. Interact with us. We love having conversations with you guys. We have some great listeners who interact with us daily. So again, thank you so much. You guys really is what makes this worth it. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the listeners-only discussion group there you can join called the Babel Conference. And then Trek.fm is the place where you can find all of the shows we're doing. And, of course, we've been growing the 602 Club side with Snyder Cuts that John and I have been doing as we're walking through his entire catalog before we get to Zack Snyder's Justice League. And last but not least, maybe you would like to send us an email. We'd love to get that from you. You can do that for Snyder Cuts or the 602 Club. Just go over to trek.fm/contact, choose the 602 Club, and you can send that email to us, and we'll respond in kind as well. So now this is really interesting to me. Obviously, we get Rambo First Blood, or just First Blood, because that's what it's called then. Mm-hmm. And it's based off a book, and there's only one book. And so the character becomes popular. They decide they want to bring the character back here. And I was really surprised to learn behind the scenes that they had actually brought very talented filmmaker James Cameron in at the time, who was a big, hot name, of course, right smack in the middle of the 80s, to write the script for this. And what was really fascinating for me to see was what his script had in it that this movie doesn't, which is they had a script which he had a partner. He had a rescue mission partner. And they apparently wanted John Travolta to play that rescue mission partner. So I'm wondering what you guys kind of thought of that as an idea before we even get into the film itself.
Well, Matt, you can immediately see my face as I stuck my tongue out. Because here's the thing. At this time in history, Travolta's career, although he's doing great, he's doing stuff like Urban Cowboy and Grease. And, it doesn't at all feel like the right actor to get for this kind of movie. If you're going to have Rambo have a partner, I feel like you need somebody that's going to be more steeped in the action genre.
So you're saying that First Blood Part 2 wasn't ripe for, say, a musical number in the middle of the film?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can totally agree with that.
I'm willing to bet that if Travolta had been in it, they would have done something like had a dance number because it's Travolta sort of thing. Like he finds them at a club when they're supposed to go out on the mission or something. I mean, Cameron's script, what's interesting about it is, it starts with Rambo actually in a mental institution, as opposed to just, in the, working in the rock quarry. And what's interesting is there are vestiges of Cameron's script that are still in here, obviously, but you can see a lot of the ideas carry forward into both Aliens and Terminator 2. Because when they go to get Sarah Connor, she's in the mental institution. You have the hero having to go back into this horrific environment that they got away from and they want nothing to do with it again. That's Ripley going back to LV-426. And according to what I've read, Cameron worked on 3 scripts at once. Rambo First Blood Part 2 was one of them. And he would work on the 3 scripts. He'd keep them at separate desks so that he never, quote unquote, crossed over. But obviously some of those ideas gestated simultaneously, and he knew a good idea when he saw one and carried it forward. So, I mean, any great filmmaker is going to do that. You put in the little mental Rolodex. I'll come back to that idea later. It just didn't work this time. What's really fascinating about it is they brought Morrell back to write the novelization, and he wound up using aspects of Cameron's script in his, because when he writes the novelization, the script that they have, just has a lot of like Rambo shoots somebody, helicopter flies overhead, and he looks at it and he's like, there's not really a lot to work with here for a novel. So he went back and he sort of like blended Cameron's, his own stuff, and the final script together. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very different film if they go with Cameron's vision. And there was actually not a fight, but there's a little bit of back and forth with Stallone and Cameron through the years until finally Stallone laid it out and said that, he like gave his version of the story and ended it with, and if James Cameron says anything different, he's swimming in a pool of lies or something like that. So it's like, oh, wow. Okay. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting to hear that, and what's fascinating too is you see, Stallone had Rocky and then he has Rambo, and they're both very successful films. And part of the reason is because of him. So he really has a lot of cachet on what's going to happen in these films. And I think that's really interesting and something I'm going to touch on in just a little bit. But one of the things I thought was fascinating is that they tried to also get Lee Marvin back because they wanted him to play the Marshall Murdoch character. But, of course, he declines. And, man, would have been really interesting to kind of have him play this, like, swarmy, senator here. But, John, I'm wondering if you still feel the same way. Is it hard to just see Lee Marvin in anything else?
Yeah. I think Marvin would have wound up detracting. I think probably they also would have rewritten it that he would have really been in Vietnam, as opposed to the way that Murdoch plays this time, which is he tells a little fib about where he was. And then you come to find out he's like, nah, I wasn't there. It's not my war. I don't care. Like he's a bureaucrat who's smart enough to be a salesman to get Rambo on board. I think Marvin changes the dynamic of things. I'm glad. I will say I'm glad that it wasn't him in that role. I do think it would have wound up. It would have been a different movie. Like, it's hard to say. Would it have been better? Would it have been worse? I think it just would have been different. And I think that Charles Napier is the actor's name. Mm-hmm. I think Napier does such a tremendous job with his role in this movie that I don't want to see anybody else in it. So
that's how I felt about it too. I think especially when you see that initial flip where you realize that the entire pitch was a lie, I think that Napier did it justice. And I although I love Lee Marvin, I think that, like you said, John, it just would have been different. And I think that Marvin kind of can come across stronger and less smarmy and conniving than Napier did it, and I wouldn't have liked that as much. So, yeah, I think that Charles Napier was the good choice for this.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting to me because I think you're both right. And on top of that, I think that so one of the main things that Stallone really is interested in portraying in this movie that the Cameron script doesn't is the politics of the time with the, MIA prisoners. He obviously has a real heart for this. And so the fact that that wasn't there was really important to him. And that's one of the reasons why they don't go with Cameron's script. So that this movie, in many ways, just becomes about the politics and these men that were left. And, I think it's interesting because what you have is this character in the middle of Rambo who doesn't care about the politics of the thing. Like, he just wants to do the right thing, which he believes is to take care of these men, especially once they find that they're there. And I thought that this movie, I'm sure people could knock it for being not nuanced enough, but I thought that there's actually quite a bit of nuance in this film, as much as there was in the first one, in the sense that we're dealing with a lot of really hot button issues at the time, and we're kind of showing all different sides to the issue, right? And I mean, we have the hero that we look at, right? And it tells us, the movie tells us that Rambo's the one in the right, the one that we should look to is being the one that's right. But I thought this is interesting because this swarming is Murdoch he brings up the whole idea of the different types of politics that go into the money and the types of choices that governments make about all of these issues. And it's not necessarily so clear cut, and so I thought that they kind of did a decent job, at least, of kind of trying to give you all the ramifications, yet at the same time, we make Murdoch such a jerk by the end that it's hard to remember that.
Well, I think Murdoch's a good replacement for Brian Dennehy's character from the first one. He's sort of a stand-in for that. But in terms of the hot button issues, what I find interesting is a lot of what this movie sort of gets pinged for in terms of what you're saying not being nuanced enough. I think Gene Siskel put it probably the most delicately of the critical responses, where he said, what Rambo does, it does very well, but the problem is that not everything that it does is particularly good, or something like that. Like, where he gave it 3 out of 4 stars. And so I think what it is this movie needs to be appreciated on the level of the same way that you would approach like John Wick, right? And Rambo has a reason, and it's very quickly laid out, and we're going to get to the action as fast as we can. And John Wick is pretty much the same way. And what's intriguing is, I don't know whether it's because audiences have now accepted this genre and moved forward with it, but I really think that Stallone is sort of punching through and evolving the action hero to a different sort of level with First Blood Part 2. And for that reason, I think he's sort of like tip of the spear. Now, I'm not saying that like this is the first action movie ever made or anything like that, but I do think things shift because of this movie. Audiences responded to it so positively that filmmakers could easily see a reason to adapt the genre and say, okay, people just all right, we got 90 minutes. Let's get to it as fast as we can. Let's give them just a very straightforward sort of arc and get to what the people are paying their popcorn money for, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, too, that it really shows what Stallone is saying he felt was needed in this movie, that it wasn't just about the action, that it had to include that political side. And like you said, Matt, kind of show both sides of the issue. But also it showed me even more of a sensitive side or another part of Rambo himself in his interactions with the female character. I think that it's really neat showing that he's got this soft side, that he does still believe in general in doing the right thing, that he's not just a guy who is gone crazy and is out there killing people all willy-nilly. He's got his reasons. He has a moral code, and he also believes that when someone's a good person, whether they're a man or a woman, that their life is valuable.
You know, it's really interesting, too, because in the novelization, Morel really gives a lot more backstory and interplay between the two characters. And so we do have a very abbreviated relationship with them here in the film. But in the book, there is a lot of shading given to everything, to the point where it's very flatly sort of laid out, where she says to him, I got to get out of here. And she has family that managed to get out to the States, and she stayed behind, and she's a CIA, liaison to make everything work. And she says to him, to Rambo, marry me so I can come back with you. And Rambo, it's very clearly laid out in the book. He's so broken. He doesn't have even an iota of sex drive left in his life. Mm-hmm. He has absolutely no interest in her at all. But he comes around in the book and says, yeah, if that's what it's going to take to get you back. And this is just to speak to your point, Christy. He recognizes the right thing to do is to get her out of here. And so he sort of assesses the situation. And yes, that's what we need to do to get you back to the States. And she even says, you can just divorce me as soon as it's all done. I don't care about that. Mm-hmm. And so their relationship has a little bit more shading to it in the book, but I don't know how you guys feel, but I think it's effective enough here to play fairly well. Although I do think that it could have stood a little bit more of a character beat somewhere along the way. Just an extra scene between the two of them.
Like a little more development. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little more conversation would have been nice.
I see that. But yeah,
I mean, maybe a little less conversation and a little more action, please.
Except if he has no sex drive, there doesn't need to be more action. He's pretty broken at this point.
I'm just teasing. I'm just quoting Elvis. No, I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I think makes this having a little bit of a love story for Rambo interesting here is that it does give you the opportunity to allow him to become more human again. In the sense that, in that first movie, he was so struggling with his humanity. And like you said, John, they kind of portray him in the book where he's just so broken. And here it's like she's able to find the chink in the armor, that there is a real guy behind this armor that he's got on all the time, that he's put on all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think it actually does work to have this bit of a love story. Now, I think you're absolutely both right. I do wish it's almost like maybe 5 more minutes of them together somehow throughout the rest of the movie would have been great, because then it's even more powerful when she dies.
And it might have led to them keeping in a moment that they wound up cutting out because test audiences reacted so poorly. The editors talked about it on the behind the scenes stuff, where when she died in the test screening cut, he lets out the traditional what you come to expect in this type of high intensity thing, where he's holding her and he looks up at the sky and he screams, "No!" And apparently it got laughs from the test audience. And they said, we can just cut that out. But if there had been just a little bit more, that moment would have been probably retained, because it would have, I think probably what those test audiences reacted to was it didn't feel earned to have that explosive of a reaction in that moment for him.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm glad they cut it, honestly.
Oh, yes. Oh, but yes. That
and even
the
way they talked about it being shot, where it kind of like boom, 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 and it like pulls out, in this stuttered motion, and that
he looks straight up and he's holding her body.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
No. But it still meant something to me, even when it's showing that he's just buried her and puts his hands down for a minute, because it's like just absorbing the fact that he's lost something else, as if he didn't have anything else left to lose already. He's now had a human connection for the first time with somebody really, deeper than just friendship. And now that's gone too. So I am kind of surprised to hear when you were saying, John, that there were people that felt like it lacked something or didn't have the substance of the first movie, because I didn't feel that here.
Well, but see, the thing is, this is what's tough, right? Is that nowadays critics are, and this is a loaded way to put it, but critics are less important now because everybody can go out and share their opinion online immediately. The tastemakers, as it were, didn't particularly care for First Blood Part 2 because they very much came at it. People like Pauline Kael, at the New York Times and stuff like that, viewed this as sort of groundling entertainment. This movie is not going to appeal to somebody who, wants to watch the latest Robert Altman film while having a nice Chablis or something like
gotcha.
that. And I know how that can come across, but it's like, this is entertainment for people of, normal, like, I don't want to say normal people, but like when I go to the movies, I know what I'm in, I know what I've picked and I know what I'm in for. And I don't have an expectation necessarily. And I'm not saying like I'm a, big power, I'm, sort of like an editorial eye sort of thing. When I go in to see a Star Trek movie, I don't have the same expectation of it that I do of a Stanley Kubrick film.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I can draw the distinction there. And I think that sometimes, especially back in the pre-internet days especially, critics didn't draw that distinction. They sat down and they said, well, show me what you got. And I think they just lost a lot of ability to judge a hamburger for a hamburger and a steak for a steak sort of thing.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think that, it's interesting to me because, again, I think one of the smart things that they do with the film is actually insert this love story because, if you do want this character to continue, I think you need to find more nuance in the character. And so to give him some sort of thing that he cares about beyond himself is really important, and the love story helps with that. I think this ability to find a way to have love again, like where she's like, what's the thing you love most in the world, or the thing you like most in the world, or he's like, he holds up his knife, and you're like, okay, that's where this guy is, and then throughout the story, he comes to have a respect for her. And I think part of that was because, they don't treat her as in some sort of like damsel in distress or anything like that. She's at his side the whole time. She's kicking butt like he is.
She comes back to save them all.
Exactly.
Spot on.
So,
that's right.
I mean, they make her an important part of the story beyond just being quote unquote the love interest, right? Like without her, Rambo would be dead. And so I think that's the thing that really helps this storyline and it makes it more relevant. And I think the other thing that what it does is, we kind of talked about the idea of the politics, and in the end, Rambo doesn't care about the politics. Rambo just cares about these guys who have been used and abused by their government. They've been sent to this place and then quote-unquote forgotten because they're not quote-unquote needed anymore. And so what he says at the end of the film, you could take it as cheesy, but I think it's really true. Like, these guys, they loved their country, they went over there, they did a thing, and now they just want to be able to feel as loved by their country as much as they love their country. And, that ability to be loved, feel love, have love, it all goes into this idea of like the love story that we got with Rambo, and being able to like open yourself up again when you've been so betrayed by something as big as a country. How hard would it be to have love in the first place? So I think what it does is it really ties into that last thematic element that we get where, and the real political message in here is that this isn't political. It's just about, we need to see these guys as men, regardless of the war that they fought or whatever. They deserve to be seen as men who need our love and respect, and need to be brought back home with honor. And yet that's, we saw in the first movie, that's not what they got. And we see in the second movie that they just keep getting betrayed over and over again. And like, oh my gosh, that's just heart-wrenching.
And too, to piggyback on that, Matt, I felt that especially when Rambo is talking to her on the boat before they even get to the village initially. And he says, "I'm expendable." And it keeps coming back up, her saying, "You're not expendable. I don't want you to think that way about yourself, because nobody is, because your country should recognize every single human being as a person who has value and not just as a number."
Yeah, and there is, I think that is the political angle, and Murdoch, of course, is the conduit by which it's conveyed, because of the fact, how many people before they saw this movie had ever heard of this idea that there was ransom asked for prisoners of war, and it was refused because we don't deal that way. We are not going to do that. And Murdoch even says, and the thing is, you can understand his logic with it, where he says, we're going to give them money to wage different types of war against us. That doesn't make any sense. Well, yeah, if you look at it just on a ledger sheet, but the way that Rambo and Troutman are looking at it, who cares what it costs? These guys have lives and families. You're killing all of them. Bring them back. Why not? And it's really interesting because of the fact that this comes out like there was that seismic shift in the 80s about the way people really reevaluated the Vietnam War and the way people were treated. And of course, First Blood is one of the first indicators of that. And First Blood Part 2, I think, is that sort of cathartic expression of everybody's frustration and anger about the way things happened. And I think that's probably why it really resonated as strongly as it did. Like when it came out, it had like some sort of record-breaking box office weekend. Which, with numbers that nowadays, like doesn't even pay for the craft services on a Marvel film. But like for back then, it was absolutely killing it at the box office. And I think it's because it taps into that vein. And what's also really interesting is I wonder in a way sometimes of how many worldviews got shaped in a sense, because Murdoch as the government agent and his cronies, his pilots and everybody that are with him, it really portrays the bureaucracy in a really terrible light about the fact that, just from the very beginning, Murdoch says, he's not going to find anybody, but, we got to keep the senators happy and, keep the checks flowing. So whatever, we're just sending them over there. And it's like, when you really think about that and how dismissive he is, they're sending a single person over into a life and death situation that not only do they think is going to fail, they hope is going to fail, because if he finds anything, that's bad for everybody. So you would say to yourself, why are you even sending somebody over there? Why wouldn't you just say you sent somebody over there and you didn't there's a whole lot that you can sort of pick apart with Murdoch's character and his motivations, and including the fact that when he has his breakdown, the classic thing, I just had my orders. I was just following my orders. Well, how many people in the chain thought that this was the right thing to do? Why didn't somebody, even Murdoch, at least read Rambo in and say, listen, this is the way it's going to break down, because it's going to change the way Rambo approaches the whole thing, or whether he even accepts it.
Or even, why didn't Erickson decide to do something? He was flying the helicopter, dropping him in there.
Thank you. Exactly.
Or picking him up. Sorry.
It's funny, Christy, because you were commenting before we started that I have this sweatshirt on USA versus everybody, but really this movie ends up being Rambo versus everybody, you know, because the only person who is on Rambo's side is Troutman, you know, and, you know, he wants him, he not only wants him to succeed, you know, he wants to be able to bring these guys home as well, because of course his relationship with Rambo, you know, we see at the beginning of the movie, he wants him, he's tried to get him out of prison and everything. You know, he's done everything he can for him. And I think, you know, John, what you were saying about the idea of the bureaucracy, I think you're absolutely right that this movie may be in some ways responsible for helping shape an entire generation's beginning mistrust in their government. That started with, you know, all the way back to Watergate, where it gets started. But here, you know, you see a movie like this, it portrays, you know, the bureaucracy really not caring about you. I mean, basically, that's what the movie's saying. If you went and fought in this war, yeah, your government really doesn't care about you. You're just a number on a balance sheet that they're trying to figure out how it all balances out. You know, so this is another link in that chain that I think has an impact on that, you know, how we feel about our government and whether we feel like we can trust it. And, you know, I mean, it's sad to say that, you know, through the 80s and the 90s and the aughts, you know, we've just continued to chip away at that. And part of that is just because of the things that we find out. And, you know, the bureaucracy hasn't done itself any service in that. And this movie kind of brings that up, where you feel like it's you versus everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, like the promise of America is that it is us versus everybody, right? Like we become the nation together, one nation, you know, and it just, so I do think that's really interesting that this movie kind of like hints at that idea that's just going to be something that becomes even bigger and more pronounced in the time that we live.
Yeah, you know, I think that if anything, it speaks to this idea that Watergate wasn't an anomaly, that the disillusionment started well before the 70s, that it wasn't a novel situation. And a movie like this, I think, is important for audiences to experience so that they can feel that idea that somebody can do something. That, you know, it's the whole appeal of Superman. I'm powerless, but if just the right hero comes along, he can lead us out of this mess and maybe show us the way. But to speak to that, I think what's very interesting is that at the end of the film, Rambo walks off. He has no interest in leading a movement. He has no interest in, now that he's done this thing and exposed this stuff, he's not going to go back to Washington and give an impassioned speech on the floor of Congress. He's not going to start a PAC. He's not going to hold a sandwich board outside of CIA headquarters or anything. He's just done. He's out. Peace. I think it's one of the most poetic endings that they could have gone with, is that he gives that impassioned speech and just drops the mic and literally walks off into the sunset. You know, just, I'm out. I'm completely finished. This is, until you get your house in order, I don't even want to come home. And that's going to pay off in some sense, with a future film in the series, actually. But, for this one, I mean, I'd like to put it to you, Christy. What other way could they have ended this movie than with John Rambo walking off and just basically divorcing his country at this point?
The one thing I wish could have happened was that the girl hadn't died. I wish.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
Because
sure.
I liked seeing them teaming up together against everybody and him finally having a confidant to go through everything with. So it wasn't just him alone all the time, because I definitely think that's the big thing you see about him from the get-go of First Blood is that he's alone, that he feels like the only person he has in the world that he can trust or that he feels friendship with is Troutman, and he doesn't even see Troutman that much. So, yeah, I think that if they had kept her alive and he and her had brought the POWs back together, and then either they ended up staying together in America or possibly then going their separate ways and he's just, doing a nice thing for her, I think that would have been a little bit better.
That is a really interesting question.
I can see that.
Because, it does... I'm all about the songs tonight, but it does kind of bring to mind to me like bad blood, right? Now there is some bad blood between Rambo and the United States because he kind of has seen the real underbelly of what's happening, right? Like, and he does, again, it goes back to that idea of feeling loved and wanted, and
well,
so it does create this issue. And I mean, I think, John, like you said, you could have her survive and everything, but in many ways, I think it drives home the point for him that right now he does feel like a man with no country.
Yeah, but the thing where I'd put the twist on it, what I think is an interesting escalation from First Blood to First Blood Part 2 is in First Blood, he just feels like everybody's dying around him. He's lost. He's broken inside. Nobody's helping him, and he's frustrated and alone, and all of these things because of the mismanagement and the mistreatment. Whereas I think in First Blood Part 2, what's added in there through Murdoch's character is the sort of horrific realization that it was calculated on a certain level, that it wasn't just that people didn't know what they were doing, is that there was actual purposeful malfeasance is the reason these guys are still in a camp, is the reason that they got left behind, is the reason why people like Rambo weren't treated well, is because there were people who, it wasn't just that they weren't good at their jobs, it's that they actively made bad decisions for political reasons.
I mean, yeah, in the end, they are numbers on a political abacus.
And, it is interesting, too, making that distinction, John, because I even wondered with the conversation that he has with Troutman before he even goes on this mission, he says, again, you're the only one I trust. Like, he already knows before he gets in the helicopter to go for the drop that this is a setup. But he goes anyway because he believes in what he's doing is the right thing. So,
Well, and
which makes him all the more heroic.
And this, I think, John, something you said earlier, that's kind of brings into mind that the whole idea of creating a genre to which there's the one guy who's standing for what's right and everybody else isn't, and it creates that whole, so many Schwarzenegger movies go that way. Like you said, the John Wick movies kind of play out in that in that way in some sense. This whole idea is that there's one person who's going to do the right thing because nobody else is going to do the right thing, which I guess kind of goes back to the Dirty Harry movies too, like the anti-hero hero, because nobody else will do this, I'm going to do it, which brings up vigilantes and everything as well. It's interesting because it's part of our cultural zeitgeist now to just have that idea. And I think the reason, to me, one of the reasons then Rambo as a character became so popular is that we secretly want that. We secretly want somebody to be able to stand up and do the right thing regardless of the consequences. Because that's not how most of us live, right? We're also worried about the consequences we might face for standing up for what's right. Rambo is willing to take those chances. He's willing to say, to heck with it, I'll do what must be done regardless of what the consequences to my own personal self. And I mean, that's, John, we talk about that on our episode that hasn't dropped yet, but it's a stinger for it. But Legends of the Guardians, the Snyder movie, the animated with the owls, that doing what's right means doing it over and over and over again, regardless of the cost. And that's what Rambo's willing to do, and that's what makes for a real, true hero.
I also think, though, because I think we have to be honest, that this movie is also embraced because it is such a great thrill ride.
Oh, yeah.
The action in this is so... I get a thrill out of so much of it. I love the way that they stage and direct things. I think that George P. Cosmatos he's never going to make the list of greatest directors out there or anything like that. He's directed 2 movies I enjoy greatly. One even more than this, Tombstone with Kurt Russell, is
such a good movie.
Oh, what a gem. But the action in this is staged so well and is so ahead of the curve in terms of other action movies that are out there. I still love everything, how over the top all of it is, but also, just when he's on the boat and the guy drops down and he's garroting him and he lifts Rambo up and Rambo's able to spin himself around and stab him. Like, there's so many action set piece moments in this that are beautifully put together. And considering the fact that their director of photography was literally pulled off of vacation because they lost their original director of photography, and so they went out and they got they got this British cinematographer who happened to be on vacation and basically pleaded with him to come and take the movie, and then of course also shoveled a ton of cash in front of him, and he was like, "Oh, all right. Vacation's over," and just like went to work with them. And the guy had like his own legendary, career up to that point and everything. But it's just so many pieces come together. And I think that, while this isn't a perfect movie, it's definitely, I struggle to think of why anybody would look at this and not understand why it captured everybody's, hearts and wallets, as it were, and why Rambo remains to this day such a cultural touchstone. Is First Blood was a movie that, people saw and people liked and people respected. This is the movie that turns Rambo into a reference. This is where he becomes that indelible 1980s character that you cannot escape from. And, just even the fact that they approach it, you can come into this and never having seen First Blood. Mm-hmm. You don't need it. You get the setup before the credits roll. You get the little teaser in front. You have your little cold open. This is a Vietnam vet. He's working hard labor. Something bad happened in the past, and his colonel's getting him out of prison so that he can go on one last mission. That's all you got. Like 5 minutes, boom, credits go up, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of it. It's, I get a little too effusive because the thing is, it's really weird because this hits you on such an emotional level on top of everything else. And I think it's just because everything just comes together so right for this to work. Whatever other deficiencies there are, it just sort of clicks after a certain point.
Oh, I felt the same way you did. I think that they not only give him some really cool gadgets that he gets to have every time. I love the knife that the cap unscrews to have a compass and like some stuff in there, things that you need. So all he really needs is his knife. but I like that he gets to have the bow and arrow with the really interesting tips and, causing the explosions and the fires and stuff when he needs to. And I like how they do the cinematography to slow down in the moments that he's aiming with the bow and arrow. And show that that's something that, takes a little more finesse than just pulling out a machine gun. And I think that all of that combined with the emotional part of it and having some references to First Blood where they're having him hide and pick off guys again really add up to this being a great movie. And then, Matt and I have talked about before, we like where they've decided to cut something down to what's most essential. And so the movie seems to move pretty quickly instead of having all of this extra stuff that you really probably don't even need.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Like, can you imagine, because this is about an hour and a half, add another 20 minutes to this, it becomes laborious.
Yeah.
It really it would slow down so much that you'd be sitting there in the first reel saying, okay, come on, let's get, and that's why they cut the script down, is because Stallone said it, when he was talking about Cameron's script, is he said, Cameron's a great writer and everything, but it would have been like 30, 40 minutes before we got to the action, and audiences aren't going to sit for that. They know why they're here, basically. Yeah. And I just think that's really astute on Stallone's part to know that.
And can I just say, as a woman, a heterosexual woman, dang, he looked good.
He actually, the training he went through for this was like blew people's minds.
I bet.
He literally did this whole program where it was months long, 4 hours a day, totally changed his diet, super regimented, super absolute. And I think it winds up changing Stallone for the rest of his life, because from this point forward, he becomes that chiseled figure. And, seriously, it was like people were blown away by the fact that he basically went off and just did such intensive training, and he was basically carved out of stone when he walked out of it. And because he felt that was just his responsibility as Rambo to look like that on screen. And I got to tell you, I'm not attracted the way that you are, but I see him without his shirt on. I'm like, wow, that is a lot of hard work. That is a lot of effort right there, to have to respect that.
You're just like, I mean, that's like a very tiny percentage of humanity that's willing to put in the kind of work that it takes to look like that.
Yep.
It's funny you mention that, because that's what Henry Cavill said about playing Superman, and that's why he did all the work that he did. Yeah, exactly. But he felt the responsibility to portray the character that people had seen in the comics, and for them not to be let down. And John, I think you're absolutely right with Stallone doing that here. And Julia Nixon even said, she's like, this is one of the few movies where the guy looks better than the girl in the movie.
Right?
Yeah.
So, because she appreciated it too. So, no, I mean, I think, the action here, what's great about it is how it really holds up. And there was even, the editors were talking about how Stallone even he wanted them to hold the shot as he draws back the bow, he releases it, and then have it hold for a second. So he called it basically arrow time, which is him watching the arrow travel to the position it was going to go to hit, because it takes longer than a bullet, right? And so, I think all of that really works well because the action all feels so realistic, and the great scene where he jumps out of the mud at the guy,
yes,
and everything. And there's just so much in this movie that becomes iconic later on in other films, because they're just basically doing what had already been done here in this film. And I think it's great. The action is really, I mean, again, coming from the 21st century, all of the action here, none of it feels ridiculous.
And I'm glad you mentioned the mud thing, because as much of the, sort of quote unquote rivalry between Stallone and Schwarzenegger for box office dominance and manliness and all of that sort of thing that they had fun with back then, that mud scene you see pop up a couple of years later in Predator. And it's weird to watch Rambo now and look at it and be like, wow, they literally just ripped that idea straight out of this. They just completely stole that for Predator. It doesn't mean I like it any less. It's just, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I think, and we've already talked about, now because just through our conversations, but, I think they did a great job with all of the casting here. The only thing I would mention is obviously, John, we just talked about the Karate Kid. So it's a little bit sad that Martin Kove doesn't get more to do in this movie because it would have been great to see him do more. But, I mean, what's great is that you've already kind of seen him in such a jerk role. So when he's playing this role, it works perfectly. You can see him as being this guy who's willing to go along with Murdoch and really not ask any questions.
And betray his own conscience because he has a problem with the orders, but he does it anyway. Mm-hmm. And it's another example of like, if he just says to Murdoch in that moment, no, I can't do that. He's right there. I can't not pick him up. Everything goes how differently. And so it's, everybody in that chain is responsible, all the way down to the person who decides not to do the right thing in that moment. Mm-hmm. So.
Man, it's interesting because what you just said is this is what happens when good men do nothing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
That even if you have your orders, that you still make a choice.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Yeah. It's great stuff. All right. So, what are we going to rate Rambo First Blood Part 2, John?
It's funny because while we've been talking, my rating for Rambo First Blood Part 2, for a long time was about 3 out of 5. I was pretty tough on the movie. And then I rewatched it not so long ago, and I was like, I was a little tough on it, but I also wound up reading the novelization. And I'm just going to take a minute to say the novelization is stone cold, 5 stars, couldn't put it down, read it in like 3 days. Just absolutely what Morrell pulls off is absolute genius with that book. Can't recommend it highly enough. I don't think you can get it in print anymore for an affordable price. Maybe you can. I don't know. I couldn't find it. But you can get digital for like $6. Well worth your money. But just sitting here having this conversation, I realized that honestly, I'm probably at a good 4 out of 5 stars. Like after I read the novel, I went up to 3.5. I was like, I can kind of see what they're doing. But as we're sitting here talking about it, I'm like, this is a 4 out of 5. It is what it is. It knows what it does. And it knows what it wants to do, and it accomplishes it. So, 4 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be in the same boat. Actually, this is the viewing I saw for reviewing on this show. It was the first time I've actually seen this film. I've seen First Blood 1,000,000 times, but I never saw all the other films. So,
wow.
This for me was also a 4 out of 5. I'm going to say compass knives because I still think that's the coolest gadget. I want one. But, for all the reasons John said, for also getting the vulnerability and that little bit of romance, but more just, I would say, a human connection and confidant than romance. And then really, I mean, we all walk away from it feeling like, I want to be that guy. You want to be the one good person that stands up when nobody else will. You want to be the person that's running through the, water with the cool gadgets and taking everybody out for the good cause. So yeah, for me, it's 4 out of 5 as well.
It's funny because I think that we're all on the same page. This is just, it is a good, solid movie, and it transcends because I think Stallone was right to fight for the things that he fought for in this film, because I think that they do help the movie transcend. And like you mentioned, Christy, he knows exactly what this movie is. It's not a 2.5 hour film. It's an hour and a half, and you don't need to pad it more. So absolutely 100% agree. And it's just been really fun to go through the series, and this is the first time that I've seen this as well. So,
I'm stunned. Like
Yeah.
this was, I'm sorry. Like this video cassette was like, this was part and parcel of growing up. This was like, because it was so violent and you weren't supposed to see it, until you were a certain age. It was like, yeah, let's watch Rambo. Let's watch Rambo. It's like, oh my God, what happened in that movie? Like, I'm so, I wish I could go back and see it for the first time, is what I'm saying. That's terrific. I'm glad that you guys got to see it.
But hey, you're still talking to the girl that saw Predator way too young, so.
Very, very true. Very true.
It may not have been Rambo First Blood Part 2, but I did see Predator as a child.
Arguably more scarring, honestly.
Well, this is the time of the show where we do some recommendations. And so, John, since you're the guest, what are you going to be recommending this week?
I hope I have not recommended it before. It's possible, but I don't think I have. But relatively recently released is The Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, the re-edit of the much reviled The Godfather Part 3. It's a re-edit, retitling. And Coppola, says this is much closer to the original vision that he and Puzo had for the film, that it wasn't supposed to be, quote unquote, part 3. This is the epilogue of Michael Corleone's life. And I can say that it is definitively much more enjoyable than the original cut, and well worth seeing.
So you're saying if I ever watch these, I should watch Godfather Part 2, and then Godfather Coda.
Yes, and I will pay for you and your wonderful husband to rent and watch these films.
Well, apparently we own Godfather, and I still haven't seen it, so.
Oh, I strongly encourage you to see The Godfather.
Man, how do you even know what day of the week it is? Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday. I mean, she doesn't even know what to do with the gun, John.
Well, you leave the gun, you take the cannolis.
Exactly.
Come on, obviously.
So, anyway.
It'll make sense later.
So, I have a recommendation I was really excited about as well. I kept seeing ads for this and kept saying, no, I'm not going to give in to the marketing. I'm not going to get another subscription just because of this one show. And then I did it anyway. So, I recommend watching Men in Kilts, which is now on Stars, which I currently have the promotional price of $5 a month for 6 months, just for that one show, and then decided to find other things that I could watch on there. But it's Sam Heughan and Graham McTavish, who are two of the lead characters in Outlander, that are going on a reality show road trip around Scotland, and they're both also from Scotland. So it's really cool because actually each episode talks about a different aspect of Scottish culture. The first one they did was food. And then I think the next one they're going to do is possibly sport.
Ooh,
but yeah, they did food and whiskey as the first episode. And
my two favorite things from Scotland. Well, whiskey
there you go.
Least, but,
But yeah, it just,
cool.
It's so cool to see it from people that are actually from there and not just somebody, going in from the outside to figure out all the secrets. And then all of the jokes as well, because it's just like seeing two best friends go on a road trip.
Oh, cool. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. This was a tough one. One, John, I love that you recommended Coda. I think I might have recommended it a few weeks back. I don't remember, but it was so much better than 3. And absolutely a much better end to the Godfather series. So I heartily agree with that. Christy, I'm going to have to watch that now because, well, I love Scotland and I love its whiskey and I love Scotland. Did I say that already?
And you love kilts?
Yes.
Would I say I love kilts? I don't know. I've never worn a kilt, so I can't make it. I mean, who's to say it wouldn't be nice and breezy? But I'm going to recommend something my wife and I just watched the other night. Is It Happened One Night, which is the classic Clark Gable film. And it is actually, I would say, the template for just about every romantic comedy you ever have watched way back in the day, back in 1934. It's so funny. And I love movies like that. And it's so much fun to kind of go back to them. And, I'm sure many people I've just kind of missed those types of films. So highly encourage you to go check it out. It's great. And just, it's goofy and campy and silly and all the things that make up for a great romantic comedy. And again, this is one which pretty much everything you watch these days has some bit or piece of this film in it. So yeah, it's great. But, John, if people do, want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on these days, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me as Kessel Junkie online, KESSELJUNKIE. Your social network of choice. I try to lurk a little bit everywhere, so go and find me if you want. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party, co-hosting a series called House Lights, where we look at the careers of directors. And then I am also on Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast with you, Matt, over on the Nerd Party. And then appearing in the short-run show Snyder Cuts, examining the work of Zack Snyder right here on 602 TFM Network. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah, I need to check that one out since I'm going to be watching the Zack Snyder Justice League as well.
I hope you do. I think Matt and I are having a lot of fun because he's coming at it as a Zack Snyder mega fan, and I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle.
And we're making a mega fan of you so far. So I'm just saying.
Get ahead of ourselves here.
I'm just saying. All the ratings you've been given have been good. So just whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you can find me, Christy, at Bespin Bell on Twitter and Instagram. And then, of course, I try to come and lurk in the Babel Conference. And you can find me on another show I do with my friend Amanda DeFonso called Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network, Skynet. And we are on Twitter and Instagram as well at Sabers and Spells, and are going to be soon talking about maybe some WandaVision, maybe some other stuff. So stay tuned for that.
And you could find me all over the place in social media under MattRushing02. If I'm on that platform, just look for that. You can also find me here on the network doing The Orb, as well as Literary Treks with Chris Jones. We talk about the books and the comics of Star Trek on Literary Treks, and then we talk about Deep Space Nine on The Orb. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I'm not only doing Aggressive Negotiations, but of course, you can find me doing Outposts with Drea Kaufman, as we are talking about every chapter in the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, and we're wrapping it up now. So I hope you'll check it out. It's been a lot of fun. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?
Mm-hmm.